The rifle shot echoed across the valley as Cassidy Morgan brought down a jackrabbit with deadly precision, feeding herself for another day in the unforgiving Montana Territory of 1878. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the prairie grass as she knelt to retrieve her kill, the wind whipping loose strands of auburn hair across her face. At 23, Cassidy had learned to survive on her own in a land that showed little mercy to anyone, especially a woman alone. "Fine shot," came a deep voice from behind her. Cassidy spun around, rifle already raised and aimed. A tall man sat atop a chestnut stallion about 20 yards away. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble. "State your business or ride on," Cassidy called out, her finger hovering near the trigger. The stranger raised his hands slowly. "Just passing through, madam. Meant no offense." "None taken. Now pass through faster." Her voice was steady, betraying none of the anxiety churning inside her. The man nodded, the ghost of a smile playing at his lips. "Name's Quinn Blackwell. I'm headed to Willow Creek. Would be obliged if you could point me in the right direction." Cassidy kept her rifle trained on him. "Follow the creek south for about 8 miles. You'll see it." Quinn nodded again. "Much obliged." He paused, studying her for a moment. "Traveling alone is dangerous in these parts." "I manage just fine," she replied coldly. "I can see that." His eyes flicked to the rabbit at her feet. "Still, company on the trail. I don't trust men, Mr. Blackwell." The words shot from her lips like bullets. Quinn's expression softened. His next words came quietly, almost carried away by the prairie wind. "Then let me just be a man who waits." Before Cassidy could process his cryptic response, he tipped his hat and guided his horse back toward the creek. She watched him go, rifle still raised, wondering what he had meant. 3 days later, Cassidy rode into Willow Creek for supplies. The small settlement had sprung up around a trading post 5 years earlier and now boasted a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a handful of wooden buildings that passed for civilization in the territory. She tethered her mare outside the general store and adjusted her father's old hat lower over her eyes. Inside the store, Mrs. Whitaker greeted her warmly. The older woman was one of the few people in town who treated Cassidy with anything approaching kindness. "Cassidy Morgan, as I live and breathe. Been nearly a month since we've seen you." "Been busy, Mrs. Whitaker. How's business?" "Can't complain. Town's growing. Got a new deputy, and some cattle buyers passing through." She leaned in conspiratorially. "And a handsome stranger asking about you." Cassidy stiffened. "Asking what?" "Just if I knew the lady hunter who lives up north. Said he met you on the trail. Tall fellow, well-spoken. Name of Blackwell." "What did you tell him?" Cassidy asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "Nothing much. Just that you keep to yourself. Come to town for supplies now and then." Mrs. Whitaker's eyes twinkled. He seemed mighty interested. "I need flour, coffee, and ammunition," Cassidy said, changing the subject. As Mrs. Whitaker gathered her supplies, the door opened. Cassidy didn't need to turn to know who had entered. She felt his presence immediately, like a change in the air pressure before a storm. "Miss Morgan," Quinn said, removing his hat. "Good to see you again." She turned slowly. In the clear light of the store, she could see him properly for the first time. His eyes were a startling blue beneath dark brows, his face weathered but handsome. He wasn't as young as she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with faint lines at the corners of his eyes. "Mr. Blackwell," she replied stiffly. "Didn't expect to see you in town so soon. I come when I need supplies." "Well, I'm glad our paths crossed again." He smiled, and for a moment, Cassidy felt something flutter in her chest. She quickly suppressed it. "If you'll excuse me," she said, gathering her purchases and heading for the door. "Miss Morgan," he called after her. "There's a gathering at the Peterson place tomorrow. Barn raising and such. The whole town will be there. Good food, I hear." She paused at the door. "I'm not much for gatherings, Mr. Blackwell. Just thought I'd mention it. Case you were interested." His voice was casual, but his eyes held something more. Cassidy nodded curtly and left, ignoring Mrs. Whitaker's knowing smile. That night, alone in her small cabin, Cassidy found herself thinking about Quinn Blackwell. There was something about him that unsettled her, not in the way most men did, with their leering eyes and grasping hands, but something altogether different. Something that made her want to know more, despite herself. She thought of her father, gone 3 years now, taken by pneumonia one harsh winter. He'd taught her to hunt, to survive, to trust her instincts. And her instincts about men had always served her well. After what happened with James Sutton back in Kansas City, she'd sworn never to let her guard down again. Yet here she was, contemplating attending a social gathering because a stranger with blue eyes had invited her. "You're being ridiculous, Cassidy," she muttered to herself as she cleaned her rifle by lamplight. The next day dawned clear and warm. Cassidy spent the morning checking her traps and tending to her small garden. By midday, she'd convinced herself she wasn't going to the Peterson place. By mid-afternoon, she found herself washing her hair in the creek and digging out the one dress she still owned from the bottom of her trunk. The dress was simple dark blue cotton with a modest neckline, but it felt foreign after years of wearing men's trousers and shirts. She braided her damp hair and pinned it up, studying her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger. "This is absurd," she told her reflection. But she didn't change back into her usual clothes. The Peterson farm lay 2 miles south of town. Cassidy arrived as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The barn raising appeared to be complete, and at least 30 people milled about the yard. A long table held platters of food, and someone was playing a fiddle near the new barn. Cassidy tethered her horse and stood uncertainly at the edge of the gathering. She immediately felt exposed in her dress, painfully aware of several curious glances cast her way. "You came." She turned to find Quinn beside her, his expression one of pleased surprise. He'd cleaned up, his face freshly shaven, his dark hair neatly combed. He wore a crisp white shirt and dark vest. "I was in the area," she lied. He smiled, not calling her out on the obvious falsehood. "Can I get you something to eat?" She nodded, suddenly realizing she was hungry. As they walked toward the food table, several people greeted Quinn warmly. He'd been in town less than a week, yet he seemed to have made friends already. Cassidy, who'd lived in the area for 3 years, knew almost no one. "How do you know the Petersons?" she asked as he handed her a plate. "I don't really. Been helping with the barn these past 2 days. Good folks." He filled his own plate. "How long have you lived around here?" 3 years. Since my father died." Quinn's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that." They found a quiet spot away from the main crowd and sat on a wooden bench. To Cassidy's surprise, conversation came easily. Quinn told her he'd grown up in Colorado, the son of a silver miner. He'd worked cattle drives in Texas, prospected in Nevada, and even tried his hand at bounty hunting for a spell. "What brings you to Montana?" she asked. A shadow crossed his face. "Looking for a fresh start, I suppose." She understood that well enough not to pry further. As twilight deepened, lanterns were lit around the yard, and the fiddle music grew livelier. Couples began to dance in the cleared area near the barn. "Would you care to dance, Miss Morgan?" Quinn asked, setting aside his empty plate. "I don't, just one dance," he said, his eyes twinkling. "I promise not to step on your toes." Before she could form another protest, He was gently taking her hand and leading her toward the dancing couples. Cassidy couldn't remember the last time she'd danced. Her body felt stiff and awkward as Quinn placed one hand at her waist and held her other hand in his. "Relax," he said softly. "Just follow my lead." Gradually, she found the rhythm, moving with him as the fiddle played a lively reel. Quinn was a good dancer, guiding her with subtle pressure from his hand at her waist. She found herself smiling, then laughing as he spun her around. When the music ended, they were both breathless. Quinn's eyes locked with hers, and for a moment, Cassidy felt something pass between them, a current of understanding, of possibility. Then someone called Quinn's name, breaking the spell. He reluctantly turned away to respond, and Cassidy used the opportunity to slip away from the dancing area. She made her way to the edge of the property, needing a moment alone to collect herself. The night air was cool against her flushed face. What was she doing? One dance with a handsome stranger and she was acting like a schoolgirl. "Thought I'd lost you," Quinn said, appearing at her side a few minutes later. "I should be heading back," she replied. "It's getting late." He nodded, disappointment evident in his face. "May I escort you home?" "That's not necessary." "I know, but I'd like to." Cassidy hesitated. The practical part of her brain warned against revealing where she lived to a man she barely knew. But another part, a part she thought long buried, wanted to extend this evening just a little longer. "All right," she said finally. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the moon lighting their path. Cassidy felt strangely at peace riding beside Quinn, their horses maintaining a steady pace through the darkened landscape. "You never said what you do for a living, Mr. Blackwell," she said eventually. "Quinn, please." He adjusted his hat. "I've tried my hand at many things. Currently, I'm working for the railroad, scouting routes for the new line they're planning to bring through these parts." "The railroad?" Cassidy frowned. "I hadn't heard about any new lines." "It's not widely known yet, but progress is coming, Miss Morgan, whether folks here want it or not." The thought of a railroad cutting through the wilderness around her home unsettled Cassidy. She'd come to Montana to escape the encroaching civilization that had brought her nothing but pain. They reached her cabin shortly after. Quinn dismounted to help her down from her horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. He held her a moment longer than necessary, and Cassidy felt her pulse quicken. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Blackwell," she said, stepping back. "Quinn," he corrected gently. "And it was my pleasure, Miss Morgan." "Cassidy." He smiled at that, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Cassidy, a beautiful name for a beautiful woman. She felt herself blush and was grateful for the darkness. "Good night, Quinn." "Good night, Cassidy. I hope to see you again soon." As she watched him ride away, Cassidy wondered what she was getting herself into. Men like Quinn Blackwell, charming, handsome men, were dangerous. They made promises they couldn't keep. They left when things got difficult. Yet as she prepared for bed that night, she found herself humming the tune the fiddler had played as they danced. Over the next few weeks, Cassidy found herself making more frequent trips to town than usual. Sometimes she would see Quinn, sometimes not. When their paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite and attentive, never pushing beyond the boundaries she set, yet making his interest clear. One afternoon in late September, Cassidy was hunting in the hills east of her cabin when she heard gunshots, not the measured shots of another hunter, but the rapid fire of a confrontation. She hesitated only briefly before moving cautiously toward the sound. In a small clearing, she found Quinn pinned down behind a fallen log, exchanging fire with two men on horseback across the clearing. Blood stained his left sleeve, and his face was tight with pain. Without thinking, Cassidy raised her rifle and fired at one of the mounted men. Her shot went wide, but it was enough to startle them. They wheeled their horses around and galloped away, firing a few parting shots that splintered the trees overhead. Cassidy? Quinn looked up in disbelief as she approached. What in God's name are you doing here? Saving your hide, apparently, she replied, kneeling beside him to examine his wound. Who were those men? Quinn grimaced as she pushed back his torn sleeve. Just some disagreement about property boundaries. The wound was a clean through and through on his upper arm. It was bleeding steadily but hadn't hit anything vital. You need this cleaned and bandaged. My cabin's closer than town. With Cassidy's help, Quinn mounted his horse, and they rode slowly back to her cabin. By the time they arrived, his face was pale with blood loss and pain. Inside, Cassidy set water to boil and gathered clean cloths and the bottle of whiskey she kept for medicinal purposes. Quinn sat heavily on a chair, watching her move efficiently around the small space. Nice place, he said, his voice strained. Built it yourself? My father and I built it together. She returned with her supplies. This is going to hurt. She cleaned the wound thoroughly with hot water and whiskey, apologizing when Quinn hissed in pain. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, the muscles of his arm hard and defined. As she worked, she was acutely aware of his eyes on her face, studying her with an intensity that made her flush. You've done this before, he observed as she began wrapping a clean bandage around his arm. My father was injured often enough. I learned to tend wounds early. You're full of surprises, Cassidy Morgan. She tied off the bandage and stepped back. You should rest before riding back to town. Quinn nodded gratefully. I won't impose long. But as the day wore on, it became clear that Quinn was in no condition to ride. A fever set in by evening, and Cassidy found herself tending to him through the night, placing cool cloths on his forehead and helping him sip water. In his feverish state, Quinn spoke of things he might not have otherwise revealed: his brother's death in a mine collapse, his brief marriage to a woman who died in childbirth along with their infant son, his years of drifting from place to place, searching for something he couldn't name. Cassidy listened, her heart aching for the losses he'd endured. As dawn broke, his fever finally broke as well, and he fell into a deep, healing sleep. She watched him for a moment, this man who had crashed into her carefully ordered life. In sleep, his face was relaxed, vulnerable. She reached out and brushed a lock of dark hair from his forehead, then withdrew her hand quickly, as if burned. When Quinn awoke later that morning, he was clear-eyed and much improved, though still weak. You stayed up all night with me, he said, noticing the shadows beneath her eyes. You were quite delirious, she replied, busying herself with making coffee. Talked a great deal. Quinn winced. Did I say anything embarrassing? Nothing too terrible. She poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought one to him. You spoke of your wife. His expression sobered. Rebecca. It was 7 years ago now. I'm sorry. Cassidy sat across from him. That kind of loss, it changes a person. Quinn studied her over the rim of his cup. You speak from experience. She hesitated, then nodded. In Kansas City, before we came west, there was a man, James. I thought, well, it doesn't matter what I thought. He wasn't who he pretended to be. What happened? Cassidy stared into her coffee, memories flooding back. He courted me properly enough at first. My father approved. We were to be married. Then I discovered he already had a wife in St. Louis. When I confronted him, She swallowed hard. He tried to force himself on me. Said no one would believe me over him, that I'd be ruined if I spoke out. Quinn's face darkened with anger. What did you do? I fought back. Broke his nose with a candlestick. A grim smile touched her lips. My father believed me. We left town the next day, headed west. Never looked back. Quinn reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was gentle, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Thank you for telling me." She didn't pull away. "Now you understand why I said I don't trust men." "I do." He squeezed her hand lightly. "And I meant what I said that first day. I can wait, Cassidy. However long it takes." Their eyes met, and Cassidy felt something shift inside her, like ice breaking up on a river after a long winter. By afternoon, Quinn was strong enough to ride back to town, though Cassidy insisted on accompanying him. They parted ways at the edge of Willow Creek, Quinn promising to rest and change his bandage daily. "I'm in your debt," he said. "Anyone would have done the same," she replied. "No, they wouldn't." His blue eyes held hers. "May I call on you properly, when I'm healed?" Cassidy hesitated only briefly. "Yes, you may." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. True to his word, Quinn came to her cabin a week later. His arm was healing well, and he brought a small gift, a book of poetry by Emily Dickinson. They sat on her porch as the afternoon sun warmed the hills around them, talking of books they'd read and places they'd seen. These visits became a regular occurrence over the following weeks. Sometimes Quinn would bring small gifts, coffee beans from Brazil, a colorful scarf from a trading post, once even a prickly pear cactus flower that must have taken him hours to find. Other times, he'd arrive with news from town or stories from his travels. Cassidy found herself looking forward to these visits, planning for them, even wearing her dress occasionally instead of her usual practical attire. Slowly, cautiously, she was letting down her walls. One crisp October evening, they walked along the creek near her cabin. The aspen leaves had turned golden, trembling in the light breeze like thousands of coins catching the sunset. "I've been thinking," Quinn said, helping her over a fallen log. "The railroad survey is nearly complete." Cassidy felt a pang of disappointment. "You'll be moving on then?" "That depends." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "The company has offered me a permanent position, overseeing construction in this region. It would mean staying in Montana, putting down roots." Hope fluttered in Cassidy's chest. "And is that something you want?" "It is." Quinn took her hands in his. "But more than the job, I want to stay for you, Cassidy. These past weeks, getting to know you has been the greatest joy of my life." Cassidy's heart raced. No man had spoken to her this way since James, and even he had never sounded so sincere, so unguarded. "Quinn, you don't need to say anything now," he assured her. "Remember, I'm a man who waits." But Cassidy didn't want to wait anymore. Standing there among the golden aspens, with this man who had shown her nothing but respect and patience, she felt the last of her resistance crumble. She rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. Quinn froze for a heartbeat, then his arms came around her, pulling her gently against him. The kiss was tender at first, then deeper as years of loneliness and longing gave way to newfound hope. When they finally parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you with that rifle." Cassidy laughed softly. "Is that so? Most men would be put off by a woman pointing a gun at them." "I'm not most men." His expression grew serious. "And you're not most women, Cassidy Morgan. You're extraordinary." The following months brought changes both expected and surprising. Quinn took the position with the railroad and bought a small piece of land not far from Cassidy's cabin. He began building a house, larger than her current home, with wide windows to capture the mountain views. Cassidy helped when she could, learning to saw boards and hammer nails alongside Quinn and the men he hired from town. Her initial wariness around the workmen gradually eased as they treated her with respect, taking her suggestions seriously and admiring her practical knowledge. As winter settled over the Montana landscape, Quinn spent more evenings at Cassidy's cabin, the two of them reading by lamplight or simply talking as snow fell softly outside. Sometimes they would sit in comfortable silence, Quinn whittling pieces of wood into small animals while Cassidy mended clothing or cleaned her rifle. It was during one such evening in early December that Quinn set aside his whittling knife and reached into his pocket. "I have something for you," he said, a nervous edge to his voice. Cassidy looked up from her sewing. "What is it?" Quinn moved from his chair to kneel before her. In his palm lay a simple gold ring with a small, perfect pearl. "Cassidy Morgan, you've taught me that patience brings the greatest rewards." His voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I love you. Will you marry me?" Cassidy stared at the ring, her heart pounding. She had known this moment might come, had even hoped for it. Yet now that it was here, old fears surfaced. "Quinn, If you need more time, I understand," he said quickly. Cassidy shook her head. "It's not that. I love you too. But marriage changes things. What if I turn out to be like James?" Quinn finished gently. "I can't promise we'll never argue or hurt each other's feelings. But I can promise to always respect you, to listen to you, to be faithful to you alone for as long as I live." Tears filled Cassidy's eyes. "I believe you." "Then say yes," he whispered. "Yes." The word came out half laugh, half sob. "Yes, Quinn Blackwell, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood, pulling her up into his arms. Their kiss was a promise, a beginning. They were married on Christmas Day in Mrs. Whitaker's parlor, with the shopkeeper and her husband serving as witnesses. Cassidy wore her blue dress with a crown of winter berries in her hair. Quinn looked handsome in a new black suit, his blue eyes never leaving her face as they spoke their vows. After a small celebration with the Whitakers and a few others from town, Quinn took Cassidy home to her cabin. Though his house was still under construction, they had decided she would keep her cabin as well. It was important to Cassidy to maintain this piece of her independence, and Quinn understood. That night, as snow fell outside and firelight danced across the walls, they came together as husband and wife. Quinn's touches were gentle, reverent, his whispered words of love washing away the last shadows of Cassidy's past. Later, as she lay in his arms, Cassidy marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a woman who trusted no one to a wife who had given her heart completely. "What are you thinking?" Quinn asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes the thing you fear most turns out to be the very thing you need." He smiled in the darkness. "Like a rifle-toting woman who doesn't trust men? Like a patient cowboy who knows how to wait," she countered, pressing a kiss to his chest. By spring, Quinn's house was complete. It stood on a gentle rise overlooking the valley, with a wide porch where they could watch the sunset. Inside, he had built sturdy furniture with his own hands, a table large enough for future family gatherings, a rocking chair for the fireplace, and a bed big enough for two. Cassidy moved her belongings from the cabin but insisted on keeping it maintained. "For hunting trips," she said, though they both knew it represented something more, her ability to stand on her own if need be. Quinn never questioned this decision, understanding that her independence was part of what he loved about her. Their life together settled into a rhythm of work and companionship. Quinn's position with the railroad kept him busy during the days, while Cassidy continued to hunt and trap, selling furs and meat in town. She also started a larger garden beside their new home, experimenting with different vegetables and herbs. In June, nearly a year after their first meeting, Cassidy woke early one morning feeling strangely uneasy. Quinn was still asleep beside her, his face peaceful in the pale dawn light. She slipped from bed quietly and went to the window. The valley below was shrouded in mist, the distant mountains barely visible. Nothing seemed amiss, yet Cassidy couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She dressed quickly and went outside, scanning the horizon. A thin column of smoke rose from the direction of her old cabin, several miles away. Cassidy's heart raced. She hurried back inside and gently shook Quinn awake. "Someone's at my cabin," she said as his eyes fluttered open. "There's smoke." Quinn was instantly alert. Could be travelers who needed shelter. Maybe, but Cassidy didn't believe it. Few people knew about the cabin's location. They dressed hastily and rode out, approaching the cabin cautiously through the morning mist. As they drew closer, Cassidy saw a horse tethered outside, not one she recognized. Quinn signaled for her to stop and dismount. They secured their horses and continued on foot, moving silently through the trees until they had a clear view of the cabin. A man sat on her porch, smoking a cigar. Even from a distance, something about his posture seemed familiar to Cassidy. When he turned his head to look out over the valley, she gasped. "James," she whispered. Quinn's head snapped toward her. "James Sutton? You're James." Cassidy nodded, her mouth dry with fear. "How did he find me?" "Stay here," Quinn said, his expression hardening. "I'll handle this." "No." Cassidy gripped his arm. "We'll go together." Quinn studied her face, then nodded. They approached the cabin openly, no longer trying to conceal their presence. James Sutton stood as they came into the clearing, a slow smile spreading across his handsome face. He looked older than Cassidy remembered, with streaks of gray in his dark hair and lines around his eyes, but he still carried himself with the same arrogant confidence. "Cassidy Morgan," he called. "Or is it something else now?" His eyes flicked to Quinn. "What are you doing here, James?" Cassidy asked, stopping a safe distance away. "Is that any way to greet an old friend?" James stepped off the porch. "I've been looking for you for quite some time." "Why?" "Unfinished business." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You left rather abruptly, as I recall." Quinn moved slightly in front of Cassidy. "Mr. Sutton, my wife has made it clear she has no desire to see you. I suggest you leave." James raised an eyebrow. "Wife, is it? Congratulations." He took a step closer. "But I'm afraid I can't leave just yet. You see, Cassidy and I had an understanding once." "An understanding you violated when you tried to force yourself on me," Cassidy said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Not to mention the wife you already had. Ancient history." James waved dismissively. "Rebecca's been gone for years now." Quinn went very still. "Rebecca?" James looked at him curiously. "My late wife. What's it to you?" Cassidy glanced at Quinn, confused by his reaction. His face had drained of color. "When did she die?" Quinn asked, his voice tight. 7, 8 years ago now. In childbirth." James frowned. "Do I know you?" Quinn's hands clenched into fists. "Your wife's name was Rebecca Blackwell before you married her." Understanding dawned on Cassidy with sickening clarity. "Rebecca, Quinn's wife who died in childbirth 7 years ago." James stared at Quinn, then let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. You're her brother." "Her husband," Quinn corrected, his voice deadly quiet. "Her only husband." James's expression flickered between surprise and calculation. "Now that's interesting. Rebecca told me she was a widow." "She was never married to me," James admitted with a shrug. "But she was carrying my child when she died." Quinn took a step forward. "You abandoned her. She wrote to me, told me everything. By the time I reached St. Louis, she was already gone." James backed up a step. "Look, that's all water under the bridge. I'm here for Cassidy." "You're not taking her anywhere," Quinn said, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't want to take her," James laughed. "I want what's mine. Cassidy's father stole something from me before they fled Kansas City." Cassidy shook her head. My father never stole anything in his life. The deed to a silver mine in Colorado, James said. Worth a small fortune. He took it from my desk the night you left. That's a lie, Cassidy said firmly. We left with nothing but our own belongings. James's friendly facade dropped away. Search your memory, Cassidy. A leather folder with documents. Your father must have mentioned it. Cassidy started to deny it again, then hesitated. There had been a folder her father kept with their important papers, the deed to this land, her mother's marriage certificate, a few letters. After his death, she'd put it away without examining the contents closely. Even if he did take something, it wasn't his to take, Quinn said. You'd already stolen Rebecca's inheritance. The mine belonged to her family. James's hand moved toward his hip where a pistol was holstered. I've ridden a long way and gone to considerable trouble to find you, Cassidy. I'm not leaving without that deed. It's not here, Cassidy said quickly. The papers are at our home. James looked between them, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. Then we'll all go there together. The ride back to their house was tense, with James following behind them. Quinn kept glancing back, his expression thunderous. I had no idea, Cassidy said quietly. About Rebecca. Neither did I, Quinn replied. All these years, I've been looking for James Sutton without knowing his name. Rebecca's letter only referred to him as Jay. What will you do? Quinn's jaw tightened. Get him the deed if it exists. Then make sure he never bothers us again. At the house, Cassidy went to the trunk where she kept her father's papers. The leather folder was at the bottom, untouched for years. She brought it to the table where the men waited. Inside were the documents she expected, plus several she didn't recognize. One was indeed a deed to a silver mine in Colorado, made out to Rebecca Blackwell. This belongs to Quinn, she said, holding it up. It was his wife's property. James lunged for it, but Quinn was faster, snatching the document from Cassidy's hand. The mine played out years ago, James snarled. But the land is still valuable. Railroads coming through. Quinn examined the deed carefully. This is dated after Rebecca's death. A forgery. James's face contorted with rage. He drew his pistol with surprising speed. Give me the deed. Quinn stepped in front of Cassidy. Put the gun down, Sutton. I've come too far to leave empty-handed. James cocked the hammer. The deed. Now. What happened next unfolded in seconds. James's finger tightened on the trigger. Quinn lunged forward. Cassidy reached for the rifle she kept mounted over the door. A shot rang out, then another. When the smoke cleared, James lay on the floor, blood spreading across his chest. Quinn stood over him, his own shoulder bleeding where James's bullet had grazed him. Cassidy lowered her rifle, hands shaking. Her shot had found its mark. James's eyes were open but glazing over. Should've known. You'd fight back. He whispered, blood bubbling at his lips. Then he was still. Quinn turned to Cassidy, his face ashen. Are you hurt? She shook her head, unable to speak. Quinn crossed to her and gently took the rifle from her hands, setting it aside before pulling her into his arms. It's over, he murmured against her hair. It's over now. They buried James Sutton on the far edge of their property, marking the grave with a simple wooden cross. Quinn rode to town to inform the sheriff, who took their statements and declared the shooting justified self-defense. The deed to the mine was indeed a forgery, as Quinn had suspected. The real deed was found among James's belongings, along with other documents that revealed a pattern of fraud stretching back years. He probably came after me thinking my father had the real deed, Cassidy said as they sat on their porch that evening, watching the sunset. Poor Rebecca. Quinn nodded solemnly. She deserved better. As did you. Cassidy took his hand. I'm sorry our pasts had to collide this way. Don't be. Quinn brought her hand to his lips. If not for James Sutton, you might never have come west. We might never have met. Cassidy considered this. Do you believe in fate, Quinn? I believe things happen for a reason, he replied. And I believe some people are meant to find each other, no matter how winding the path. As summer turned to fall, life gradually returned to normal. Quinn's shoulder healed, leaving only a small scar. The railroad construction continued, bringing more settlers to the region and causing Willow Creek to grow from a settlement into a proper town. In October, as the aspen leaves turned gold once again, Cassidy confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks. She was with child. Quinn's joy at the news was boundless. He spun her around their kitchen, then set her down gently, suddenly concerned. I didn't hurt you, did I? Or the baby? Cassidy laughed. We're both fine. The baby won't arrive until spring. Quinn spent the winter preparing for their child's arrival with the same care and attention he'd given to building their home. He crafted a cradle from pine, carved toys from soft wood, and read every book on childbirth and infant care he could find. Cassidy watched his preparations with amusement and love. The baby won't need all this for months after it's born, she told him as he struggled to assemble a rocking horse. I want everything to be ready, he replied seriously. I want to be ready. Cassidy understood his anxiety. They had both lost so much, had both seen how quickly happiness could be snatched away. But she also had a deep, abiding faith in their future together. You'll be a wonderful father, she assured him, placing his hand on her growing belly. Just as you're a wonderful husband. Spring came early that year. The snow melted from the valley by March, and wildflowers began to appear on the hillsides. Cassidy's time grew near, and Quinn rarely left her side, arranging for others to handle his railroad duties. Their daughter was born on a clear April morning, with Mrs. Whitaker serving as midwife. After hours of labor, Cassidy delivered a healthy baby girl with a shock of dark hair and eyes as blue as her father's. Quinn, who had paced outside during the birth as was customary, was allowed in once mother and child were cleaned and comfortable. He approached the bed hesitantly, as if afraid the scene before him might vanish if he moved too quickly. Come meet your daughter, Cassidy said softly, holding the bundled infant. Quinn sat carefully beside them, his eyes wide with wonder as he gazed at the tiny face. She's perfect. Would you like to hold her? He nodded, and Cassidy gently placed their daughter in his arms. Quinn cradled her with exquisite care, his big hands suddenly seeming too large and rough for such a delicate task. Hello, little one, he whispered. I'm your father. The baby's eyes, unfocused but bright, seemed to look up at him. Her tiny hand escaped the blanket and grasped his finger with surprising strength. Quinn looked at Cassidy, his eyes shining with tears. What shall we name her? They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one. Now, looking at their daughter, Cassidy knew. Rebecca, she said. Rebecca Morgan Blackwell. Quinn's breath caught. Are you sure? Cassidy nodded. She should be remembered, and it's a beautiful name. Quinn leaned down to kiss Cassidy's forehead, then looked back at their daughter. Rebecca, our little Becca. As spring turned to summer, the Blackwell household settled into a new rhythm centered around little Becca. Quinn finished his work with the railroad, then surprised Cassidy by purchasing the general store from Mrs. Whitaker, who was ready to retire. We'll run it together, he proposed. You can still hunt and trap if you want, but this will give us a steady income for Becca's future. Cassidy, who had discovered she enjoyed being in town more than she'd expected, readily agreed. They expanded the store, adding a section for hunting and trapping supplies that Cassidy managed. Her knowledge and skill earned the respect of even the most skeptical male customers. Their cabin in the woods became a weekend retreat, a place to escape the growing bustle of Willow Creek. Quinn added a room for Becca and reinforced the porch where they would sit in the evenings, watching their daughter learn to crawl and eventually toddle after butterflies in the meadowgrass. One summer evening, as they sat on that porch with 5-year-old Becca asleep inside, Cassidy rested her head on Quinn's shoulder. "Are you happy?" she asked. Quinn wrapped his arm around her. "Happier than I ever thought possible." "Are you?" "Yes." She looked out at the land they had both come to love. "I was so afraid of trusting anyone again, of being hurt. And now I understand that trust isn't about never being hurt. It's about believing someone will be there even when things are difficult." She turned to face him. "You waited for me to learn that." Quinn smiled, the same smile that had first caught her attention years ago. "I'd have waited forever." As twilight deepened around them, Cassidy thought of all the twists and turns that had brought them to this moment, her flight from Kansas City, Quinn's search for answers about Rebecca, their chance meeting on the Montana prairie. So many things could have gone differently. So many choices could have led them away from each other. Yet here they were, together with their daughter sleeping peacefully inside, the future stretching before them like the vast Montana sky. "I love you, Quinn Blackwell," she said simply. He kissed her gently, then rested his forehead against hers. "And I love you, Cassidy Blackwell. Yesterday, today, and all the tomorrows to come." The promise hung in the air between them, as solid and enduring as the mountains that surrounded their home. It was a promise kept through patience and perseverance, through understanding and forgiveness, through the simple act of waiting for love to find its way. In the years that followed, the Blackwell family thrived. Becca grew into a strong, independent young woman with her mother's spirit and her father's kindness. 2 more children joined the family, a boy they named William after Cassidy's father, and another girl they called Hope, for what had brought them together. The town of Willow Creek grew as well, eventually becoming an important stop on the railroad line. The Blackwell General Store expanded into a proper mercantile, known throughout the territory for fair prices and quality goods. Cassidy and Quinn grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated births and mourned deaths, always facing life's challenges side by side. On their 30th wedding anniversary, they returned to the spot by the creek where Quinn had first proposed. The aspens had grown taller, but the view of the mountains remained unchanged. "Do you remember what I told you that first day we met?" Quinn asked as they stood hand in hand beside the creek. Cassidy smiled. "You said you'd be a man who waits." "The best decision I ever made," he replied, his blue eyes still bright despite the wrinkles that now surrounded them. "Waiting for you." Cassidy squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that had supported her through decades of love and life. "And the best decision I ever made was learning to trust again." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, they walked home together, 2 people who had found in each other not just love, but understanding, respect, and the patience to wait for dreams to come true.